are back. Welcome back to Lifting with Lions. I know you've missed us a ton over the past little while. We're so sorry. Tenny and I have been very busy. Tenny more so than I have. He's been doing his EMT training on top of all sorts of other stuff, which has taken up a ton of his time, and I've just been vacationing way too much, like I do.
Yeah, you've just been having a summer.
Yeah, exactly.
I finished EMT, and I'm officially on to advanced EMT training.
Wow,
so it's been good.
Look at you. You're already ready to save lives.
I am, if they're within scope of my practice.
Yeah, and right now we're not just saving lives, we're saving souls, the Lifting with Lions way.
Yes, all those souls lost on the trail up the mountain.
Exactly. We're here. The Sherpa is making its way slowly up and picking up all those who are left behind.
Exactly, which is exactly what Sherpas do in real life.
Yep. And you know who's very left behind?
Leonardo DiCaprio in Titanic.
Yeah, exactly.
And unlike him, we can all fit on this raft together. How's that for an impromptu segue, Jared?
Don't be like Leonardo DiCaprio, and also don't be like Rose, who just leaves him.
Especially don't be like Rose.
Yeah. If your friends are drowning in the ocean of the lack of gains, what to call that ocean, don't just leave them behind. So today we are talking about isometric holds. Now, I say that because I want to sound smart, but I honestly had no idea what it was until I talked to Tenny about it. So I'm just going to let you take it away and explain what that's all about.
Yeah. So quick recap, first of all. The last episode we had was kind of a breakdown on how Michaela's working out has been going with you.
Yeah, has it been that long?
It's been a while.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
So that was episode 19, I think. And we talked a bit about sarcomeres and hypertrophy in the episode before that. And this kind of ties into that because there's been a lot of hype around isometric exercises and how they apply to strength training and hypertrophy. And like any, momentarily popular method of exercising, a lot of claims get made and not all the claims are true. It doesn't mean that the exercising techniques are bad. It just means that you need to look carefully at whether or not it deserves a place in your specific program.
Right.
Because it may be effective for some people and a waste of time for others, especially where some people have barely any time already to do their already minimal workouts. So just jumping right into it, we have concentric and we have eccentric movements. A concentric movement is a shortening of a muscle. So think the bicep curl where you're actually curling your arm up. Then the eccentric movement is the lengthening of that muscle or the lowering of that weight back down as you extend your arm. So we have these two different types of movements that make up most of all of our training regimens. Whether or not we use a push-pull routine, we are still incorporating eccentric and concentric movements together to hit all of the different heads of the different muscles in our body to make sure that we are well balanced and effective in applying the most force and athletic. But there's a third type of contraction, which is not actually a contraction or a lengthening at all. So this is isometric. So an isometric movement is when there's no shortening and no lengthening. So think during that bicep curl, you stop halfway up and you just hold it there. Now imagine you've got a dumbbell, a 15-pound dumbbell in your hand, and you're just going to hold it there for 10 seconds, 20 seconds, maybe 30 seconds, maybe all the way up to a minute. After a while, that's really going to start to burn. And if you're doing it at a certain angle where it cuts off blood flow, it can result in a huge pump as well.
And that's what we're all about.
All about the pump. So because it results in pump and it results in a lot of pain, which we typically associate with hypertrophy, we see a lot of claims being made at how effective it is for hypertrophy and for strength training. But we're going to talk a bit about the actual research behind isometric holds and the things we know for sure about them and whether or not they may be good for your training. So, according to Healthline, I think I just pulled this straight from them, so I'm quoting them here, but I thought they had a really good introduction paragraph to this. So they say that isometric training is essentially a way to categorize exercises that recruit muscles and exert tension without actually lengthening or shortening the muscle. In other words, your muscle is flexed, but it is neither expanding or compressing. It is a stagnant way of placing a demand on a desired muscle or group of muscles. Close quote. So I thought that summed it up pretty succinctly.
Yeah.
And then moving on from that, there's two types of isometric movements. There's yielding isometric, and then there's overcoming isometric. So these aren't the ones you're typically going to be seeing on all these articles. Everything's usually going to group it just into isometric movements. But there are actually two types of this, just like there's multiple types of hypertrophy. But with isometric movements, the yielding ones, that is very simply put, it's where you hold a weight and aim to resist eccentric forces. So it's where you are resisting that contraction. So think of holding that weight and trying to stop your body from lowering it down and just maintaining that position, not going up and overcoming the force, but not letting the force overcome your muscle, just holding it in place. And the other one is called an overcoming isometric movement. And this is where you are pushing against an immovable object. So think of throwing on 600 pounds on a bench press bar and getting under it and pushing as hard as you can. It's not going to move. Neither are you. You're going to sit there and you are going to push that as hard as you can, and it's never going anywhere. That is a overcoming isometric. So sometimes people will push against a wall, or they'll load up something super heavy with plates and just push against it as hard as they can. Or they'll get like a plate and pulley machine and they'll rack all the weights up to it and they'll hook on a cable attachment and then they'll pull it as hard as they can and just sit there pulling for 30 seconds, not moving, but trying to overcome this immovable object. And I personally prefer yielding isometrics. So those are the ones where you're not going against something immovable, because first of all, it's easier to measure the tension. If you have a 15-pound weight and you're holding it still, a 30-pound weight would be harder, right?
Yeah.
But if you cannot move 300 pounds and you cannot move 800 pounds, is it really any difference between the two?
Yeah.
At a certain point, you can't move more than you're not moving.
Yeah.
So it's hard to gauge progress with that, but it's also hard to kind of see exactly how it's forcing your muscles to react. So you can see how tired you get with a 30-pound and a 50-pound weight if you're holding it in a certain position. But if you're just pushing against a wall, there's only so much you can do there to tell how it's affecting your body.
Yeah.
And it can also be a lot more stressing on the joints to do overcoming isometric. So if you're sitting there and you're pulling as hard as you can on a rope and it's not moving, it can put a lot more stress on the joints.
Yeah.
Than if you're holding in a movement where it's putting a lot more stress on the muscle in a lot of circumstances. Obviously, that's going to vary per exercise, but as a general rule, from all the research I've seen, it tends to be more strain put on the joints themselves in a overcoming isometric movement than in a yielding. So I prefer yielding isometrics. And there's also more positive research behind yielding isometrics to show results of improvement. So I'm going to dive into some stuff real quick from the Mayo Clinic. And so the Mayo Clinic is another quote from them. So they say that since isometric exercises are done in a static position, they will not necessarily improve speed or athletic performance. They can be useful, however, in enhancing stabilization, maintaining the position of the affected area, since muscles often contract isometrically to aid in stabilization. And this is an important thing to note, because a lot of people who are listening to this probably want to become more athletic, not just bigger, muscular.
Yeah.
So when it comes to increasing speed and increasing agility and just general athletic performance, from all the stuff I've looked at, isometric exercises are not clearly beneficial for those results. You're in a static position. It's not increasing your muscle in the way that it needs to be trained, and it's just not proven to be really effective, especially when you could be supplementing a different exercise in its place. That would be much more effective for your training purposes. But there are some health benefits to isometric training. Mayo Clinic also notes that there is research that shows that there could be improvement to blood pressure levels from doing isometric holds over long periods of time. Not like sets of 30 minutes, but after doing the exercises for months in your routine. So it could increase blood pressure health and decrease high blood pressure. And it can also be really helpful for people who are in rehabilitation, especially with rotator cuff injuries or shoulder impingement. And it can also be helpful for people with arthritis who have a lot of inflammation in their joints and they can't move their joints in repetitive motions as much. And so to avoid that pain, you can do an isometric hold, and it helps kind of maintain strength and promote muscle activity without wearing out and putting a lot of strain on a joint. So it's a really good option for people like that as well if they're looking to add exercises to an already limited workout. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense.
Got anything to say so far?
So what immediately comes to my head is ab exercises seem to, in my mind, take advantage of that. Like, for example, planks, or when you just lift your legs off the ground and hold it. Is that an isometric hold?
It is.
And so I've heard that those are effective for your abs. Would it be safe to say that there's maybe more effective exercises? Or in this case, maybe isometric holds are the most effective?
So when it comes to your abs, we are going to talk about a couple of those because we have the plank holds. We have wall sits are another common one. Overhead holds, glute bridges, because typically you'll just bridge a barbell and lower it back down.
Glute bridges.
Yeah, so you're laying on your back and you put the barbell and then you bridge up.
Oh, yeah.
But if you hold it in that space for 30 seconds, then that's an isometric
that makes sense.
Movement. And while these ones aren't necessarily proven to add a significant amount of hypertrophy or strength, there is a lot of research that supports that they increase muscular endurance.
Yeah.
So while a plank may not be as effective as other core exercises at really increasing the musculature in your abs and defining your abs a lot more, it can be really helpful for strengthening the muscular endurance capabilities of your core.
I don't believe it because I saw on Instagram that if you do that for 30 seconds a day, then your abs will be ripped.
It's true, and you'll actually turn into Chris Hemsworth mixed with Chris Pratt mixed with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Oh, yeah.
That's how it works.
Together.
It was on Instagram.
Yeah, Instagram said it, so it is true.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a super secret method that celebrities are using called Know Your Body Type. Just quoting those stupid YouTube ads.
Are you
now.
Eating according to your body type?
Do you think I'm going to be eating a salad or a pizza tonight? You probably guessed salad. Wrong. Man, I could go off forever on those.
But honestly,
everyone knows that who's listening.
That was a joke, but really, I have seen things on like YouTube and Instagram that are like, planks, are they the most effective ab exercise out there? Just do planks and you'll get abs, you know?
Yeah.
I've seen that multiple times. So, I mean, obviously, I take everything with a grain of salt, but I didn't look too much into it. But now that we're talking about it, it would kind of make sense that it might be effective in ab endurance, but I don't know if it exactly builds your muscles and makes them more defined.
Well, and here's the other thing on it. Going back to Mayo Clinic's research into isometric movements, you can build kind of this strength in the musculature in only the position that you're holding in, right? Mm-hmm. But how often in real life are you in the position of a wall sit? And you have to hold that for an extended period of time. Not often. Usually you enter that position for a very brief second when you squat down.
Yeah.
And then when you stand back up, you pass through that position again. but it's not something you're staying in. So while something like a plank may be effective for building endurance and strength in that position, and you might be able to see people on Instagram who are doing a plank and people are putting 4 45-pound plates on their back and they're staying straight. How applicable is that to real life scenarios? Yeah. How much more applicable would it be to, I don't know, set up from a laying position like a sit-up would train you for? Something you use multiple times a day your whole life. Like having your core strength to be able to sit up out of a compromised position if you're injured would be a lot more effective than being able to hold 200 pounds on your back and stay at a straight angle. I just don't see the necessity of doing planks for a application.
Just to show off.
Yeah. And that's what a lot of these things are, focused on social media and stuff, is what looks cool on a camera. Yeah. Not necessarily what's applicable. And so for anyone who's trying to be an athlete or improve just their athletic performance and capabilities, you have to be doing athletic things. Not just the stuff that looks cool on YouTube, but the best way to become an athlete is to train like an athlete. And while people who are athletes do some of the dumbest training I've ever seen in my life. Look at LeBron James's squats. Did I show you those?
Oh, yeah, you did. You sent me the video.
Yeah, he's doing squats at like 8th depth, and everything about the form is wrong. And, this is probably one of the richest super athletes in human existence, right?
Yeah.
So when people say, oh, these people get where they are because they have the best trainers in the world and the best nutritionists in the world, if that's what the best trainer in the world gets you, I'm not impressed. So there's a lot of pro athletes who are doing really stupid exercises, and I have no idea why. It blows my mind, honestly. But some of these things, they just look terrible for the athlete's health and performance. But what I mean by train athletically isn't to copy all athletes. It's to look at the stuff that is necessary for your performance. If you are trying to be a sprinter, is it super necessary to do long distance endurance training for running? Yeah. If you're trying to be a quarterback, is it super necessary to do just massive amounts of bench pressing? Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of things where you have to kind of prioritize your training, because everyone only has so much training that they can fit and still recover. And so you have to just put the important stuff in there and look at what's necessary for you.
Yeah, I feel like we kind of talked about this way back when, about how people want to throw in weightlifting or want to do weightlifting, but also throw in all sorts of, I don't even remember. We talked about like yoga or whatever else.
Yeah.
And not that that's necessarily bad. I remember Michaela brought it up, and I don't remember what she said, like, should I go running or something like that? And while it's not bad, you're like, you also have to consider the amount of energy you're exerting and how much food you're burning, and
kind of jack of all trades thing.
Yeah.
Master of none. Like, so, you have to find something that you want to be good at, because you can be decent at a lot of stuff or great at a few things.
Yeah, so know what your goal is and then focus on what gets you to that goal, and once you achieve that, then branch out.
Exactly,
But if you do it all at the same time, you're never going to get there.
Yep. Learn to prioritize things and don't spread yourself too thin.
Yeah. So we've said it, but figure out what you want, If you really just want to look bigger, then maybe these isometric holds are actually not going to get you there, unless you want the pump. Maybe it's effective for that.
Yeah, maybe it just psychs you up in the gym. Mm-hmm. But, on that same note, some of it can actually be detrimental to your other training and your focusing. Because look at bodybuilding and trying to build size to your muscle. If you're trying to do that because you're passionate about it, but you're also passionate about becoming the best collegiate sprinter in the country, how helpful is that extra 20 pounds going to be as a sprinter? It's not just not going to be helpful. It's going to cost you seconds in a race, which leads to you not getting that scholarship. So learn to focus on the things that you really want to prioritize. And you can do off seasons. You can do, this is why bodybuilders do cuts and bulk cycles. It's not because it's just fun. It's because you can't do them at the same time.
Is it fun?
I think it's fun. I think it's a little fun, but I've heard most people hate cutting. But I will say it sucks wearing clothes and being cut because you look so much smaller than when you're bulked. And people are like, wow, you look so thin. And it's like,
sucks wearing clothes. I'm going to get that quote framed.
Yeah, you can put it on a t-shirt that I'll hate to wear.
Yeah.
It sucks to wear clothes. But with cutting and bulking, you can't do them at the same time. When you hear the claim made that you can, I mean, this is the whole thing that comes back to Hollywood actors and a lot of suspicious athletes where somehow they're staying lean year round, but they're also constantly putting on muscle mass. This is why you cut and bulk, because without additional supplementation and use of certain
steroids.
Yeah, steroids. And androgenic compounds and stuff, you cannot stay at a very, very lean physique and significantly increase your body mass at the same time. Because to do one, you have to essentially be in a caloric surplus, and in the other, you have to maintain a deficit or a maintenance level. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't make sense to be able to put on 20 pounds of muscle in 2 months and still stay the same weight. It just doesn't work that way naturally. Yeah. And so you have to be able to find the things that are most important to you and then eliminate the things that are either unnecessary or that are detrimental to your training regimen.
Right.
So when it comes to isometric holds, it may be really helpful for someone who has rotator cuff injuries. Might be really helpful to someone with arthritis. Or it can be really helpful to people who are just trying to maintain strength, but they don't have the means to do full exercises right now. Let's say you're in lockdown and you've got 4 weeks that you're in lockdown for who knows whatever reason. And you cannot access anything to lift weights with. You don't have resistance bands, nothing. But if you take some really heavy bags or something and you fill them up with books and you just hold them outstretched, it's going to be activating those muscles in an isometric manner, and it's going to be at least providing some stimulation to prevent any atrophy from occurring over a long period of time. So it can be helpful for someone who's trying to maintain muscular activation when they cannot work out in any other way. But kind of going back to hypertrophy and how this all relates to hypertrophy is I mentioned there are 2 types of hypertrophy. Well, there's a couple types, but we're going to talk about 2 and not all the weird like subtypes that people have tried to come up with. So 2 main ones are myofibrillar and sarcoplasmic. So myofibrillar, I don't even know if I'm saying that correctly. I don't know if it's like a weird noise like in Spanish. Myofibrillar. Probably not. So I don't know why it would be. Myofibrillar hypertrophy. So this is what we're talking about when we're saying we're causing damage to our muscles. So we're tearing them apart, we're damaging them, and then they're repairing bigger the next time. So we have actin and myosin, which are components in our muscles that grip to each other and they cause contractions by pulling on one another. And this is kind of where these contractile proteins are utilized and where you see the most size change from kind of actin and myosin usage is myofibrillar. Sarcoplasmic is involving the sarcoplasmic fluid. So it doesn't have these proteins, and the sarcoplasmic hypertrophy is mostly just involved in repetition exercises. So the more repetition you do, the more you can increase sarcoplasmic activity. And so these are both 2 methods that you don't need to go very deep into. And they're a lot more complicated than what I just explained. Probably didn't explain very well. But sarcoplasmic hypertrophy is not necessarily correlated with strength. So this is why someone can be really big, like a bodybuilder, and not necessarily really strong. So why you can see someone who's a power lifter bench way more than a massive bodybuilder is this muscle mass that you gain from the sarcoplasmic hypertrophy doesn't necessarily have a lot of application purposes. It is very strong, but it hasn't been trained and conditioned to the same degree that the alternative form of hypertrophy would do. So it can look really big and it can give a lot of effect for people like bodybuilders, but it's not going to do the same thing as a different type of hypertrophy training for a power lifter. And so for an athlete or something, myofibrillar hypertrophy correlates a lot more to the strength gain and the performance. And so you don't want to focus too much on exercises that are doing the opposite side that you want to focus on. So I know it's a lot and it doesn't make much sense right now, but essentially the two types of hypertrophy vary depending on exercise. This is why people do really high set, low rep amounts of bench press for powerlifting, but for bodybuilding, they'll do much higher repetitions. It's because they're trying to achieve different hypertrophic results. And so when it comes to isometric movements, there just hasn't been a lot of correlation that it's improving either of these forms of hypertrophy gains. And so it's not something you want to invest too much time into unless it really seems like it's going to be a necessary part of your workout routine.
If you have kind of a special circumstance.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's not necessarily going to make you big, and it's not necessarily going to make you strong.
Exactly. It's not really going to push you over the edge on either one. It may help in endurance. Mm-hmm. And this is where it's tying into the one thing that I think is very important. This is where I think it does have a practical application. For anyone who's trying to do something like powerlifting, we've talked about how this isometric movement only really develops a lot of endurance and strength within the static position that it's occurring in, right?
Right.
And you're saying, well, you're not in many of these positions a lot. Yeah. But if there's one position that you are in that's very, very, very important in powerlifting, that is a static hold, it is at the very bottom of a bench press. So when you unrack the bar and you lower it down to your chest, if you stopped right there and did a paused bench press and you're just holding it on your chest, that is an isometric movement. And it is extremely vital to be able to maintain your strength and the tension in your muscles in that position, and then to be able to overcome it and raise the bar back up. So for powerlifting, and especially for bench press training, and I can see it for pause squats as well, is that it can be very, very helpful to do some isometric hold training very occasionally with bench presses, where you get a moderate weight on the bar and you bring it down and you hold it just above your chest in a held position. And you don't want to do a lot of weight here because you're not trying to put a ton of tension on your shoulder girdle and all the muscles there. And you're not trying to put a lot of tension on the tendons, but you're trying to train it in a light way so that when you get into that position and you get kind of stuck on a big bench press movement, your body is adapted to that position and you have the capabilities to overcome that isometric movement and go back into a contraction of your muscles like you normally would.
Really kind of for your own safety.
Yeah, for your own safety, and also just because sometimes there's that suck moment of the bench press where you get down low and then you just have to overcome it. And if you can get past that, the rest is easy.
Yeah.
So if you can improve that most difficult moment of the bench press, your potential for what you can lift at a powerlifting meet is a lot higher.
Yeah.
So it can be really helpful to incorporate that if you're looking into powerlifting or overall strength performance sports, to just very occasionally incorporate some isometric holds where you're essentially doing a long duration pause bench, where you're training to just build that muscular endurance in that compromised position. So the last thing on this is just general notes on how people use these isometric movements and the kind of things they kind of swear by. And a lot of these aren't completely backed up. Well, not a lot of these, about 2 of them. But if you do them occasionally and you use them for rehabilitation purposes and you don't go until failure when you're doing rehabilitation exercises, because there's no point if you have a shoulder impingement or you are recovering from a rotator cuff injury to do your rehabilitation exercise until failure. Yeah. That's just going to prevent healing. But the other thing is people typically seem to see the best results from isometric movements between 30 and 60 seconds. So if you can hold it for 30 seconds and no longer than 60 seconds, then that's typically the range people seem to be staying in.
Yeah.
It seems to be working the best. And then the other things, neither of these really have a lot of science behind them, but these are the ones that a lot of the big athletes seem to be utilizing. They'll pair them with concentric movements. So they'll do a bunch of curls, and then on the very last curl, they'll hold it for 30 seconds in an isometric hold. So that's one way of incorporating these into your exercises. And then the other one is to superset them with the same muscles. So you'll do pretty much what we just said, but you'll do lots and lots of bench press or something, and then you'll lower the bar down and you'll just hold in that position. And you might even hold it at different points for something like a leg extension or whatever you're doing, and not to always do the isometric hold in the same spot. But those two are just ones that are common ways of utilizing this exercise. And I mean, apart from that, don't really have anything more on isometric movements. They're a little out there in terms of what has been proven to be effective with them, but they do have some promising results on things like stabilization and overcoming resistances in a position like the full descent of a bench press. So, I mean, they could be really effective for some people, but for most people, I would say they're not an optimal exercise where it's really going to change their performance.
Right. Well, you definitely want to up your performance. So
yeah,
always improve that performance.
Always. It's all about the performance.
Yep. And so there you have it. If you came into this episode saying, what the heck is an isometric hold? Now you know. And now you know whether or not it's going to be effective for you. But I think this is what we're all about, just making people aware of what things are and in what circumstances they're effective, just the science behind it.
Yeah.
So that's super cool. Thanks for that.
And as always, if anyone has any studies or anything that they've seen that has contrary information, send them our way and we'd love to take a look at them. Because there's tens of thousands of studies of every subject on the internet, and it's not possible to go through all of it. So if you ever see anything that you think we'd be interested in, let us know, and we're more than happy to revise comments on things and go back and do another follow-up episode. So
yeah,
just hit us up with anything.
Exactly. Well, we're happy to be back. Hopefully we can maintain this.
Yeah.
Hopefully you won't have to have another break, because I know you were so sad just looking at your phone every day.
They were just stuck wandering on that certain elevation of the mountain waiting for the Sherpas to find them.
Yep. Turns out that Sherpa was on vacation.
Yeah.
So sorry about that. But thanks for listening, and we will see you next time on Lifting with Lions.